Good morning, everyone. If you've been to these before, and then, well, to any webinar ever really, just hang tight for a few minutes while we wait for everyone to jump on, and then we'll be getting started fairly soon. And you'll hear me say that a couple more times for people who are just jumping on now. Morning, everyone, or I guess I should say afternoon as of 1 minute ago. Afternoon, everyone that's just jumping on. We'll just be a minute or two while we're waiting for other people to jump into the session. So just hang tight. The topic for today, just to make sure you're in the right place, is combating digital imposter syndrome in the workplace. And while you're waiting, if you wanted to, you can just introduce yourself, say hello to the other participants in the chat at the bottom, and just mention where you're from. If you want to exchange LinkedIn profiles and do a bit of networking, feel free. And we'll be getting started quite shortly. Welcome, everyone that's just joining us. We're just going to be another minute or two, but yeah, we'll be getting kicked off quite soon with the session. Welcome, and thanks for coming. And for those of you who have heard me say that 3 times now, I do apologize. It's just kind of the name of the game. Hey, Laura. All right, I think we might start things off. So my name's Eric, and I'll be introducing our other panelists quite shortly. But before I do that, I'd just like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're virtually gathered today. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And again, before we sort of get kicked off into introducing the panelists, just wanted to talk a little bit about, I guess, first off, my name's Eric. I am the head of partnerships at Academy XI, who are putting on this webinar. We have a series of them. For those of you who have been on previous ones, welcome back. So for those of you who don't know us, we are a school, is the easiest way to explain it, specifically for digital design and data disciplines. So we teach things like digital marketing, user experience design, service design, data analytics, software development, product management, agile, pretty much all sort of emerging job roles and disciplines that are in very high demand at the moment. So that's a bit about us. I run the, I guess, corporate training side of the business is the easiest way to describe that. So we have 2 sides. I run training for teams inside corporates and government, and the sort of probably the better known side of the business is a public-facing training organization teaching individuals all the subjects that I just mentioned, very much with a goal of, chasing that dream job and getting it. So, so that's us in a nutshell. Today's topic is digital imposter syndrome and how to combat it. As you can imagine, doing what we do and teaching what we teach, this is a topic that comes up a lot. A lot of the training that I do, especially the shorter form types of training for corporate teams, is literally to combat this exact issue inside businesses. So a big one for us, very close to our hearts. And to help us discuss it today, we've got 3 amazing panelists who are all actually from our designer in residence program, which I'll explain a little bit further on. But first, I'll just get them to introduce themselves. And starting in no particular order, just from top to bottom on my screen, start with you, Taîss.
Right, g'day, thank you. So I'm Taîss, my pronouns are they, them. I am a Senior Manager with Accenture in their strategy consulting, specifically technology advisory group. Yeah.
Good enough. Thanks.
Myself, that's good enough. Yeah.
that was perfect, short and sharp. Anjully, do you want to go next?
Yeah. Anjully Lozano, I lead the CX design team in the customer experience for Officeworks, and I work with roughly 10 designers, different levels of skills, so UX and CX, a mixture.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, Matt.
Thanks, Eric. Matt Tsourdalakis here, or you can call me Matt T for short, because I do have a very long surname. It's difficult. So currently working at SelfWealth as a lead product designer in the fintech space. And yeah, super pumped to be here.
Great, thanks, Matt. So as you can sort of get a feel for, all team leads, managers in the digital space, people who've been running teams for a long time. So today it'll be a little bit of a mix of our and their personal experiences, and also what they see in their teams and the larger businesses in which they work, in terms of sort of this digital imposter syndrome thing that happens. So that's going to be the topic of today. The way that it will work is we're going to start off with a couple of polls for you guys. So we want to get you engaged and hear from you a little bit. It'll be quite interesting data for you guys to receive as well. Then I'm going to be posing a series of questions to our panelists around this topic, and then from there we'll just have a fairly organic discussion around some of the things that we see. We'll have one more poll at the end, and then we will open it up to questions from you guys, which we'll do our best to answer. So at the bottom of the screen, you will see a Q&A button. So feel free to fire any questions for us in there as we go, or at the end, up to you. And then, as we mentioned in the chat, you can just sort of network chat with each other, et cetera, go in there. So any questions for us, go in Q&A. Anything else can go into the chat. So that'll be the broad kind of format for the session. Really, our goals always with these things are just, tell it like it is, try and sort of read between the lines of some of these things, sort of a for us, by us mentality. And hopefully you guys will take away some interesting tidbits of knowledge, action items from the session moving forward. So before we get into the questions, let's go for polls. So my colleague Liv will be posting that up, so hopefully everyone can see that there. So poll number 1, digital anxiety. How often do you, and this is very, very much not going to be sort of broadcast by name, so it is, what's the word I'm looking for? Anonymous. So be as honest as you can and just tell us, how often do you experience anxiety around digital or new technology? And I think you guys can see the results on the screen, but I may be wrong about that, so I'll read it out as we go. So right now we've got 6 with never. So thanks for coming on the session. If you have never, maybe it's your teams that you're worried about. Rarely at 20%, sometimes at 54%, often at 16%, and always at 3%. So that's sometimes at 53%. That's by far the winner as we go forward, which I think is probably what we would have expected, where I often will have, I kind of get to that point where, like, I know a lot about this stuff, it's what I do. And then sometimes I'll get into a meeting with like some software developers or something and be like, oh, I don't know anything. This is terrifying. Get me out of here. And I think that kind of stuff happens to everyone. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So I think everyone can probably see that now. So yeah, it sort of ended up as I'd sort of described. So never at 5%, rarely at 23%. The bulk of people sitting in that sometimes area, and then often at 15%, and then always at 3%. So for those of you who put always, I am sorry to hear that, and hopefully we can help to bring that down to an often. I mean, it's not a great outcome, but better than nothing, I guess. So all right, so that was poll number 1. Now on to poll number 2, which is more into like the solutions. So, like you yourself, how do you have you overcome those feelings of a digital impostership, if that's a word? in the past, and we just got some examples there. So now we've got some numbers coming in. So engaged in self-learning, coming in 43 at the moment. Asked my organization for formal training, sitting around the 15% mark. As we go up, John on my past experience, so 41%. That's a big one. Avoided using the new tech or system at 4%. I secretly think it might be a little higher than that. Oh, jumped up to 13, okay. As I said that, I was proven right almost immediately. That always feels good. Found a mentor, 24%. Okay, that's actually quite high, probably higher than I anticipated. And obviously people are choosing multiples here, which is good. Asked a colleague for support in at 53%. So it's great to hear that people are using all of those. It probably also is nice that avoided using the new technology is the lowest one, because that probably, the avoidance technique is probably not a long-term solution. Okay, so I'll end that and share it. So yeah, so you guys can kind of see what some of your, well, compatriots out in the space are doing to combat some of these problems. And, you know, a lot of this is what we're going to be talking about over the next 50 minutes. So thanks for participating. Really helpful for us also to get a feel for where you guys are at. So cool. Okay, so I'm just going to X out of that. And now we'll jump into sort of the question phase of the session. So going to start sort of at the base, like pretty much the basics of all this. So according to researchers, 70% of people experience imposter syndrome of some kind in the workplace over the course of their careers. So just starting at baseline, and maybe starting with you, Matt. Do you see this inside your workplace? I know you're quite new at SelfWealth, but over the past, I guess, in previous roles as well, what's been your experience with this?
Yeah, look, definitely. I'm sensing it, considering like we're injecting a lot of new digital talent in SelfWealth, and I think a lot of businesses would be experiencing that at the moment, where there's a huge demand for you know, tech talent, digital talent to sort of come in with everything moving completely remote and digital. So yes, I think I'm definitely sensing a lot of that. And I think when I read this question, I think about like those instances where you're sitting in like a Zoom call or a meeting and someone's talking about something about digital, and they're using maybe acronyms and all these terminologies, and you're just sitting there and everyone else is nodding in agreement. They understand what's being spoken about, and you're just sitting there going, what are they talking about? So I think one way, you know, that I've seen it kind of manifest in that way. And I think one thing that can sort of help in that is just not to assume that people understand what you're talking about, and just make sure that you're constantly checking in and confirming, do they get it? Because like sometimes your audience can be quite broad. In a business, you're talking to all different people. You might have developers in a meeting. You might have your CEO in that same meeting. You can't assume that everyone is going to have that same level of understanding. So I think it's good for us to know our audience when we're talking, and make sure that we're not chucking all sorts of, I mean, acronyms are the worst, I think, when people start spitting them out and you just sit there going, what is that? And you just like try and Google it while they're, actually that's one advantage being remote. You can sort of Google and people don't know what you're doing.
Well, I have to go to the toilet. I'll be right back.
Yeah. But I mean, look, it is something that we need to be aware of, that we don't be the ones who cause the imposter syndrome. But equally on that receiving end, yeah, just you might have to Google a few things if you're not sure, and just sort of take a deep breath and try and work it out, or even be the one to maybe put your hand up and ask a potentially silly question, but probably everyone is thinking the same thing.
Yeah, often they are. Yeah. And so thank you. Yeah, that's great. And Anjully, what's your sort of, are you seeing it inside your businesses, the businesses you've worked in?
Yeah, definitely. We obviously work with a cross-functional team, and a lot of dev and tech persons. So yeah, I can share a little bit of experience on that end of, like, you know, talking tech dialect, and then I just don't understand. And I think in the team as well, like obviously the technology is evolving so much so quickly as well that you cannot expect to understand fully the story from the other function team as well. So yeah, asking the question on, I don't understand, rather than going away with a doubt. It's like I'm the only one odd in the conversation. I think that there's a lot of people in the meeting that you might feel that way. So ask the question, don't be, be kind to yourself as well, because you will have a lot of things to learn in your area as well, in technical digital space. You cannot expect to learn 100% what other people area is as well. So yeah, so be kind, and just I think one thing is just how much is enough for me to understand what they're talking about that is actually impacting my area, and how we can work together.
Yeah, totally. And Taîss, maybe from you, like, is there ways, like, inside businesses that you work in, like Accenture, when you see, I mean, it depends on what department you're working with, but how does it manifest? Do you see are there certain things that you see in people that you feel like they feel out of their depth? Is there anything that sort of like telltale signs or anything like that?
Look, there are, but most people will misinterpret them. I think the big thing we need to bring up front is that we tell ourselves a great big narrative around this topic, right? The first narrative is that we are the imposters. And the second narrative is that everyone else has got their shit together, and therefore, we're the ones who are left out. So what does that mean? That means that what we're actually seeing is people reacting in different ways. Some people will become reserved, others will become angry, others will pretend there's nothing wrong. A big thing, and especially at the moment with the pandemic and working from home, and a lot of this being kept undercover, so to speak, is people are starting to burn out from the stress. And so we're not, we don't put that in the category of imposter syndrome. We tend to sort of go, oh, it must be a pandemic thing. But the reality is, these are the emotional reactions and the stresses that are actually manifesting. Yeah,
no, really good point. And I mean, when you're just constantly pushed out of your comfort zone, out of your comfort zone, out of your comfort zone, eventually, you just want to run back in there. And that if that means running away from the business entirely, that is an option that people are looking at. So I think that sort of combination of, it's just COVID and like the stresses of COVID, but then everything that extrapolates out from COVID in terms of my job role has changed so much. Like I'm having to do all these things I never had to do before. And there's only so much the new that people can absorb over a certain amount of time. And different people have different abilities to absorb and to adapt to new ways of working. So I think, having those frank conversations with people around how are you coping to all this change? I think that's massive. So really good call out. So thanks, guys. So on to question number 2. So you guys are all digital experts here, but I guess that comes into everyone not being quite sure. Are they a digital expert? You are until you meet like a senior solution architect, and then you're like, oh no, I'm not. I don't know what I'm talking about at all. So maybe that's one takeaway from anyone here who's a bit more like sort of on the junior end of the sort of digital spectrum, is that there's always going to be someone who knows way more than you, and you'll meet them and then you're terrified. So it happens to everyone. Like even people who are quite senior still get into a room where or it's just a different tech stack. They don't understand it. And there's no kind of half measures with this stuff. If they're talking about a coding language that you don't know, like there's just no way to sort of fluff your way through that really. So anyway, so I'm assuming though that you guys didn't come out of the womb digital experts. So during your journeys, is there anything that any times that you've really sort of struggled with this or had to deal with it? And maybe let's jump back over to you, Matt. And this could be quite a while ago now.
Yeah, no, I can definitely remember when I was more of a junior designer, especially because I started in that creative and graphic design sort of space, and then started transitioning into UX and found that it was very difficult for me to make that transition because I was being labeled as a graphic designer and when I wanted to be a user experience designer. So the way that I sort of combated it was I just became super hungry for any piece of information or knowledge that I could find. So I created for myself, I mean, I didn't know it at the time, but I sort of created my own little, I call it like an environment or a regime of continuous learning where I would sign up to newsletters where I'd get emailed to my inbox, you know, the latest articles, the latest hot topics around user experience design. I would go to meetups. I would I remember there was even a point where I was working at a company where they'd hired a UX designer to work embedded within the business. And I literally, like, when he was in like the kitchen, like filling up his water, I'd like go up to him and ask him questions about UX, you know? So it was those sorts of things, just like being super hungry to learn, that really sort of made me feel not like I had it all together, but I felt like I was on a trajectory. I was on the improve, and I think that really helped. I think the worst place to be in is where you sort of go, oh, I have no idea about this topic or what this is, but I don't know how I can go about improving my understanding. That's the worst place to be in. But I think we're fortunate. There's so many resources, especially now with the internet. There's so many resources out there. You do have to just do some digging and find what works for you. I mean, there's everything from podcasts, YouTube channels, there's all sorts of things. And then there's even people you can ask your colleagues or reach out on LinkedIn. But yeah, that's how I did it. And the cool thing is, like, I still do it to this day. I still have that environment of continuous learning. It's evolved. And I don't read the same types of articles I did maybe back then, because they're not as contextual for me now. But yeah, it's awesome. Once you have that, it's like you build this momentum, and then you kind of feel like, oh, I can learn anything, because I'm just constantly always hungry to find out more.
Yeah, great, awesome. That's ties very well into what we do at Academy XI, is just that openness to learn new things. Anjully, how about you? What's your journey to your current position been like?
Yeah, I guess I was thinking about that in my journey, and similar to Matt and many other probably designers, UX, and in the call, you start as a graphic design. So that was my first career. And what we did was, like, they kind of separate a little bit the computer from the concept and understanding the problem and all that. So kind of similar to the UX. And even though I knew computers, I didn't know about the software. So it was a big learning curve for me. But also, like, you know, I wanted to do this. I wanted to learn how to do it. And we didn't have classes to learn how the software worked. So I needed to do it myself. At that point, we didn't have so many competitors. So we had, I think, freehand. It was one of the software back in the day. So freehand Photoshop and all this stuff. And yeah, it's just practice and exploring the tool, and, you know, making sure you have the time to explore and do some projects on your own. And that way you start kind of grasping a little bit more. Once you get that hang of that software, let's say, like, probably freehand, it was slightly, like, you know, similar to Photoshop. So you kind of get the flexibility of kind of swinging from one software to another one. And I think I found it today, where we have so many tools at the moment to choose from. So that's the same thing. It's like, I guess we have a pool of more options, but the flexibility will be there. So if you learn a sketch, you easily can transition to XD and do that. So with Figma, with a slightly, you know, different touches, but yeah, I think self-learning and also asking people around you, it definitely help to increase your productivity and your learning about that digital space. Same with learning, reading articles and be in touch with, you know, the industry.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's quite interesting, the comments about, you know, learning new pieces of software in specific, which is, you know, if it's, you know, InVision, if it's Figma, if it's Adobe XD, whatever it is, the UX space, so many other spaces, almost anyone here, no matter what their job is, are going to have to learn new software programs at some point to do their job. And what I talk about a lot in our training space is just that curiosity and actual, like, I'm going to go in here and play with the whole program and try to figure it out. Because I think the worst thing you can do is someone comes along and shows you like the 9 buttons you need to press to be able to do your specific job. And if that's all you're ever learning, you're never understanding the larger system and how it connects to other systems inside the business. and then you just end up feel like you're boxed in this tiny little software space, and that you don't understand the larger digital sort of environment that exists inside your business. So a lot of the training we do is around sort of opening people's eyes to like the why of how software has been developed and why it's being used in different circumstances. And as soon as you get that, you can start to make those intuitive leaps and critically think about how, where you fit in and all that sort of stuff. So Taîss, I might, not because I want to, but I might skip you over for this question just because of time, and jump on to question 3. So in the teams that you guys are part of, I imagine you'll hire people for different reasons. Some of them are going to have a very specific skill set here and maybe be weaker over here. Some of them will be the exact opposite. So there's going to always be, or often be, gap areas. You'll get a unicorn occasionally, but when you hire someone, I do talk about people as unicorns. I'm not sure if that's really a thing, but I know it's usually companies. But anyway, when you are onboarding somebody, is there anything that you do to sort of gauge where those gap areas might be inside digital space specifically, and like help to bring them up to speed in those areas that they didn't maybe feel as comfortable in? And Taîss, we can start with you.
Yeah, look, part of the onboarding process for us, and even when the organization doesn't support it, something that I've always done in my teams is to put together a skills matrix. Self-assessed, diagnosed level of skills. But from that, the reason for that is to get an understanding of where they're at, understanding of what they do and don't know. But the real reason is to customize a 30, 60, 90-day plan with them. And part of that is that, look, I have a belief that onboarding is an experience that doesn't end at the end of the first day or week, right? It's a continuing process that can literally take months. So the first 3 months, it's about getting them up to speed as quickly as possible. So if they tell me that a primary tool that we use is a weakness in their area, then we'll give them time to pick that up. But there's also the other elements, because walking into an organization, you don't know anyone yet. You don't know the processes. You don't know who's who in the zoo. And so putting all of those capabilities and learnings together and allowing them to explore that, so both the organization themselves and the tools, while getting onboarded to the actual work they're doing, is the best way to overcome that.
Yeah, I think that sort of concept of, specifically people entering the business, like they're not just no one's gonna walk in and be firing on all cylinders from day one. I think another good call out there is that, for obvious reasons, a new employee isn't going to say in the interview process, "Oh, I'm really bad at this." Like, that's never going to happen under any circumstances. So you have to give them that free space once they're hired right at the beginning to be like, "Tell me the thing that worries you the most about this role." And if it's in that digital space, be like, "It's okay. This isn't a secret," and then we fire you. Like, it's not a trick question. Give them that sort of ability to tell you what they're most concerned about, and then you can actually create sort of an upskilling, a capability plan for them, like that 30, 60, 90-day piece that you were talking about. But if they don't feel comfortable to actually tell you what their gap areas are, because they will definitely know, they'll be worrying about it. If they didn't get a call back for a while, they're going to be like, "Oh, I didn't get the job because of this," and they'll be obsessing about it. So if you can kind of squash that, or like turn it into like, "Oh, I have a chance to learn this thing that I was feeling uncertain about," like that'll be huge for them. So something I would definitely recommend. Great, thank you all of you. Moving on to question 4. So you guys are all 3 of you on this session are part of what we call our Designers in Residence program. So for those of you who don't know what that is, it's a mentoring program for our current students. So all 3 of the lovely people speaking to me today are doing one-on-one mentoring sessions. So it's one mentee over the course of a 12-week period. And so they get to know those people really, really well. So with those, and don't throw any names under the bus, in terms of specific mentees, but have you seen or heard from your mentees that they have digital imposter syndrome, or do they have those moments where they're like, "I don't belong here. Like, who do I think I am trying to become a UX or a software developer, etc.?" And maybe start with you, Anjully.
Yeah, definitely a huge part of, I guess, on those 12 weeks and having the interaction with the mentee, they have that anxiety. They have, some people are transitioning from a different industry to becoming a UX or UI designer. So that is a very huge worry. What I also said to, like, you know, to the mentees, explore. You have more than just the technology to express what you need to express. There is more skills than the, you know, the tool that you use. So leverage on that, but also like you need to explore the digital space, definitely. So go in tutorials. YouTube is great to do that. There is so many tutorials in there. There is so many forums and webinars like this in terms of designs and things like that. They're also helpful, very helpful. And reach out to people. I think there is I guess a barrier that we put to ourselves, saying like, oh, like, you know, I don't know anyone in the industry, but reach out to people. And if you have any questions, we're pretty happy. Like, I think everyone is pretty happy to go and connect to those new, you know, designers in the industry to help them move, you know, to a better space. And, you know, put that aside on, like, in my mind, is putting that aside, that anxiety and that worry aside, because that stop you to progress. So, you know this much now, and then you will know more later, like in a week, in 2 weeks, in a month, if you actually put some time to explore and become a bit better. So the fear of not knowing what everyone does know at this point, it's probably a big stopper for the mentees and for everyone. But yeah, it's something that it's greater in the people that are coming into the industry very new.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like with the public facing side of Academy XI, those are the people that you guys are mentoring. The people we see that are the most successful are the ones that, this is kind of a weird phrase, but like, use your excitement as a weapon, almost. Like, just go out there and just meet everyone, and people will kind of be like, whoa, they're gung-ho, but they will still engage with you to, like, they'll be like, I can't fault this guy for being so excited. Like, look at this enthusiasm. And you'll even get mentors who are like, they act like my mentee actually has got me back excited about my, you know, like my role again, and like the learning. And, you know, sometimes you can get into the drudgery of your everyday job, and all it takes is someone coming along and just blowing your mind with how excited they are, and you go like, oh yeah, my job is pretty cool. And like when we first started the designer in residence program, we were trying to come up with all these, like, what could we offer the designer in residence, like the mentors, that will make them want to do this thing. And when we first got into the first session with everyone, we discovered very quickly the thing that they wanted to do was mentor. They wanted the experience of doing it because it's good for their careers, but also they just wanted to give back to their industry. So I mean, broadly, I think for people who are more junior, if you want to get into the digital space, design space, just reach out. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by what you find. Matt, did you want to elaborate on that? So just, I guess, as an aside, Matt actually helped us found the DIR program as our sort of mentor the mentor. So very, very close to the program.
Yeah. And one of the mentees, because I generally don't always have a mentee assigned, because I'm sort of as Eric said, the mentor of the mentors, but I have stepped in to be a bit of a pinch hitter. And one of my mentees phrased it to me exactly in this way. A few weeks ago, he said, yeah, I'm struggling with imposter syndrome. And he's in the process of going to interviews. So he's done a course. Now he's trying to get a job and interviewing. And when I was listening to what he was saying, what I noticed was he was really fixating on the areas of weakness that he had. And what I tried to do is say to him, mate, you need to understand that you have a bunch of strengths and you have some weaknesses. You need to remind yourself of your strengths and try and play to those strengths. So when it comes to things like lack of experience interviewing, well, that's not really a weakness, that's lack of experience. So what I advised him on was, sometimes when we get fixated on these ideas of, oh, I don't know anything about this, or I just feel like an imposter, I said to him, write down what those doubts are. So write it down on a bit of paper. So it might be, I have no experience. I don't even know if I can do this design, UX design thing. And then put that on one side, and on the other side of the bit of paper, write a response to that, like a truthful response. And like, for example, well, I can't be expected to have experience interviewing in design because I'm new to it. I'm a student. And I just said to him, write the rational responses to these irrational thoughts. And if it's something that you identify it's an area of weakness, write down how you're improving on that. So, well, every interview I go to, I'm getting more confident. And lo and behold, a few weeks later, he's come to me and said, yeah, no, I'm feeling much better about all this now, just from that experience and just building that. So I think it's important when someone comes to us with experiencing that imposter syndrome, they just need some encouragement a lot of the time. So you kind of just got to say, hey, fair enough, you're not great in that particular area, but let's remember, you're really good at all this other stuff. So what are the things, how can you use your current strengths and abilities to upskill yourself in that area that you feel is a little bit lacking?
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, a great takeaway is it just, back yourself, basically. You're good at stuff. Focus on the things you're good at. Go into an interview with that confidence. And then if someone says, oh, do you know this? And you go, no, and I really want to. So, lay it on me. And you show that back to that excitement piece again. It is, and I do it too, where you just go into this black hole of focusing on all the things that you're not good at or you think you're not good at. And you forget about all the stuff that you actually are. So really good. And Taîss, what's your thought on that with your mentees? Have you seen this imposter syndrome rearing its ugly head?
Yeah, look, and it's not just with the mentees, it's everywhere. But look, I think the great misunderstanding and the millennials and the Gen Z have really sort of embedded this social discourse that they're digital natives and therefore they shouldn't be suffering these because they should just get it all. And it's not true. You're not going to. You weren't born with an operating manual that said I can talk to all software. But I think the thing I'm going to say that I say to my mentees is the same thing I say to people in the workforce, which is reframe this. And working off what Matt just said, it's not a syndrome. It's not you. It's an experience. All right. The moment you start reframing this as an experience, I'm suffering this experience where I'm feeling out of my depth. I'm feeling like an imposter because of X, Y, Z. You can then reframe it to ask those questions. Well, can you control it? Can you affect it? What can I do to remove it? How do I minimize the experience so this becomes just another glitch that I won't remember in a couple of months' time? It does worlds of wonder for the way you attack that problem and see yourself at that point.
Yeah, I think there's two really good, interesting call-outs there. One is that, like, when you say the word syndrome, it's like a disease that's just you have it. And, I mean, obviously lots of diseases can be cured, but it sort of has that sort of implication of I just have this for good. And that's by no means the case. And then the second one of like, this is something that I'm experiencing, something that's happening to me at the moment. But that's by its nature, something you experience is transitory, like that's happening now, but there are things that I can do to alter that. So I guess that, yeah, I really like, I think you mentioned that in our sort of run-up session for this, is that like reframing it from a syndrome to just something that you're experiencing, because it's external on you. It's not you having a problem that you need to sort of apologize to the world for. Like, that's not what's going on here. So really, really good. Thank you. Okay, so moving on, we're going to do a bit of a shift over here to more like, what does digital imposter syndrome or the digital imposter experience mean for business? So the question, number 5 is, do you guys see digital imposter syndrome like affecting productivity, creativity in the workplace? At the end of the day, do you see it affecting the bottom line and the ability for companies to get things done and to ship product and all these things that you need to do, particularly in the digital space? So maybe, Anjully, go back to you.
Yeah, definitely. When we have, so many tools available at this time, then obviously the creativity and productivity will be affected. So how I see it is that in the design space, for example, we have so many tools like collaborative, like we have Mira, we have the software, we have I guess analytics and research, and working from home has kind of exploded that for us to explore even more, because we can't actually go outside and meet people to research. So learning and those tools and explain that to the business is like, okay, well, we need to learn Askable, or we need to learn Hotjar and Adobe Analytics and all these tools that connect together. But yeah, we just don't have, I guess, the time to learn everything at 100%. So we kind of like have to just do little bits and pieces, and that productivity gets a little bit down. In terms of the creativity as well, so if you're learning the software, like for example a software for XD to create the wireframes or to create the designs, then if you are too fixated in how perfect that will look, or how much you don't know about the tool, then obviously that will drag you down to a rabbit hole, and it will limit the expression that you will have creatively. So I think the separation between what the concept is and how you can display that in the digital space have to be a little bit separate. And yeah, have that, I guess, yeah, put your hand up if you cannot actually express what you can in the digital space. And in my area, we have a lot of designers, so it's kind of a bit easier to assign to someone or to connect to another designer to help you boost that that space. But yeah, it's just kind of like, yeah, reaching out to other people if you feel that you're stuck.
Yeah, I think a really interesting call out there is that I think one of the symptoms of digital imposter syndrome in design in particular is perfection, and the like sort of seeking perfection, because you're like, oh, maybe I'm not good enough. Is this going to be, what are they going to say when I show them? So you end up working on something way too long, and because you end up like, it's sort of decreasing returns in terms of how much better you're making this thing the longer you work on it. It also isn't an agile methodology then, instead of showing someone a low fidelity prototype and saying like, hey, this is rough and dirty, what do you think of it? You're waiting until the very end to show them something perfect, or you think it's perfect, because people have this thing where the longer I've worked on something, the better it is. And that's not true, but people think that it is, because it's hard to sort of admit that your hard work doesn't mean it's better. And so you have to sort of separate. I'm going off on a tangent here a little bit, so I'll reel myself back in. But that's something that I talk about a fair bit, is that you just have to admit, like, just because I worked harder on it doesn't mean it's going to be better. And so show something to someone and be like, is this any good? And then they can go, yep, or no, or like somewhere in between, which is the most likely scenario, and go from there. So that digital imposter syndrome affects you in this weird way, where you're trying to achieve perfection the first time out before you show anyone something. I think that's quite common. I can't remember where I was in order of who I've called on at this point. So maybe Taîss, let's jump back to you. So are you seeing it affect bottom line?
Yeah, look, and I'll replay what I said earlier. What I'm seeing is that the collaborative nature of teams starts breaking down if we don't talk about this and let people voice it. Because people don't want to be the one who is the idiot in the group. And from a team perspective, collaboration is your gold, right? But when you don't have that, you start getting the emotional distress, you start getting workplace stress, you get burnout. From that, you start getting absences. From that, you start getting a breakdown from the team. And yeah, if it doesn't take a genius to see the dotted line between, that happening and a breakdown of your goals and objectives.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of the one-day courses that we do in my space for teams is like, so you've got a whole development team, you've got UXers, you've got software devs, you've got a product manager, you've got QA. They don't always know what the other people do for a living that well, and there isn't really often a space where they can be like, let's all learn a little bit about what each other does. And it doesn't have to be really in-depth training, but just that ability to understand a bit more about someone else's world, appreciate them a little bit more. One of the greatest outcomes that we get from training is like intro to UX for product managers we do fairly often, and someone going like, man, I'm never going to bug those guys about all the research stuff again. And we go, yay, that's a win for us, and just having that. And so like, even though you may be an expert in your job role. You might have digital imposter syndrome around what the other people around you do. And then that can create friction, or if you don't value someone's role enough, like there's a reason why these roles exist. Like they're not just in there to make people feel good or to give people jobs. And so even just that little bit of extra understanding about what different roles do can really help. And yeah, like you were saying, if you don't have that, and if people are not working together because they don't understand each other, or because they've got sort of extrapolations and symptoms of digital imposter syndrome, then it breaks down, product doesn't get shipped, and then that, that sort of percolates to the entire business. And so, I mean, the digital space, like digital roles, digital departments can either make or break a company for better or worse. And a lot of it can a lot of problems can stem with this, what seems like a very simple problem. So I'll move pretty quickly through the last little bit of this. That was me talking way too much. So apologies. So question 6, due to the pandemic, people, and this is an interesting one. So people have lost a lot of those in-person moments. Like a lot of what I've learned is, I just call it like learning through osmosis, just from being in a physical space and listening to what software developers and other people are saying. And now I don't have that. I'm sitting at home. So are you guys seeing that? And is there any ways that you've found to sort of combat the working from home, not being able to learn from others scenario? Anything you guys do? And I'll go back to Matt for that.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it really depends how you learn. I actually, after thinking about this question, I actually put down as a little note that, there's perhaps more opportunity to battle at working from home, because now you can like Google and watch YouTube explainer videos without worrying that someone's going to be like looking over your shoulder in the office going, why are they researching that in the middle of the office, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think this is where that creating that environment of continuous learning, I think, is quite important, because if part of your way of learning is from those impromptu conversations, water cooler conversations, or overhearing people chatting, you're right. Now that we don't have that, everything is a Zoom call you have to organize, or you send a question to someone on Teams chat. You do miss out on that. So that's why I think if you learn well in that environment, you need to probably find other ways to recreate that, whether it be through virtual meetups or listening to podcasts or whatever other things you can find. Once something sort of gets taken away from your way of learning and upskilling, you got to make sure that you replace it with something else.
Great.
That was my take on that.
Yeah, and I may just move on to the 7th and final question, just for the purposes of time, but just like sort of a quick one on that. Replacing things. I think we just need to move away from that mindset of like, there's this concept that when you start a job or you're in a job role, like, all the things that will ever need to be known, and like someone will be like, oh, why are you like learning about that? And you should just almost have to push back and be like, are you not learning? Like, I'm always going to be learning. And just that concept that you need to know everything from day one is just not applicable or real. And that's a really cool call out of it. If something goes away from your learning, you got to replace it with something really good as well. So last and final question. Do you guys have any examples of how businesses can support their people to get like better, to build their digital literacy, to combat this digital imposter syndrome? Have you guys seen any concrete examples of things your businesses are doing? And jump back to you, Anjully.
So as a business, and I'll probably talk about, the team that I manage. And when I interviewed, you mentioned something before about interview, when you have an interview and someone is, have to be like, I would prefer them to be upfront, but, if they don't know about the software and areas, and which I have a few already that I have, hired with that kind of weakness, if you might call it. But, it's not a weakness. Now that I know that they don't feel comfortable with certain tools and they actually wanted to do more and learn about it, then I can actually facilitate some environments or some tasks that will be helpful for them to learn. And also like, I'm pretty happy to meet with them and learn, teach them myself in the tools that they're not that great at. The other thing is I always encourage them to, obviously we talk about a little bit before, YouTube is great, like internet is awesome. So go and you know, have some time and learn with it. It doesn't matter like if you spend some time during working hours going and learning something, because that will obviously help you in the future in the tasks and the projects that you're working on. And if they have anything to, you know, if they have a short course or something they want to do, we always, as a, you know, Officeworks as a business, open to consider and, you know, have a paid training, which is great. Because at the end of the day, it's not just upskilling the person, but, you know, bringing that knowledge into the team and, you know, leverage from that in the future. So I think that's probably the three things. So myself, encourage them to teach them, you know, from the tools that we have in the internet and YouTube. And the other one is formal training.
Yeah, great. I mean, either way, the outcome is, it's amazing when someone admits that they are not good at something and you go, awesome, let's fix that. And then they will jump headfirst into, and then some, you know, often they'll end up being super good at it. It'll be one of their core strengths and they'll have so much pride that comes from that. And at the same time, you've given them career development pathways as well, which is, it's sort of a win-win really. As long as you just find the people with that sort of, the weakness turns to excitement, turns to a new skill set. It's a really cool journey to see people go on. One of our favorite things to see at XI. Yeah, sorry.
I found the majority of the, you know, the designers that come into my team and from the mentees as well, the drive from, you know, I want to learn. So give me the opportunity to learn, which is great. That's what you need. You don't necessarily need someone that is A+ in everything, but just someone that have that drive.
Yeah, thanks. And Taîss, probably go over to you. Anything that your team, your business, Accenture does to give people opportunities to combat this digital imposter issue?
Two words: training and opportunities. I mean, we've already talked about training, so I'm not going to go over that. But opportunities are going to be a little bit harder because really what you're talking about is, you know, putting together something that's considered an activator. So, I mean, effectively creating a space for them to occur. So this can be as simple as sharing a brown bag session with your team. I'm going to bring Matt in and he's going to talk about working with Figma and what he did or what have you. Or it could be something really left field where you pick, you know, one day a quarter and you get people to do someone else's job for the day. You know, creating those opportunities is really where you also create the unexpected results beyond the training.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, when we do our longer form training, we call it project-based training because we'll have a 12-week program and we literally will take a project from the business and weave it through the entire 12 weeks so that the team that's learning the new skill, like UX, et cetera, product management, are doing a mirrored actual project from inside the business. And then by the time they get at the back end, they're like, I have now done this thing inside the business and it feels real to me because it was quite real. And that's like an opportunity that can actually present it back into like the C-suite sometimes. And give them those, and like, yeah, they can do something in sort of a softer environment and then they can move into doing it for real. And that sort of gives them the new skills and helps to combat that syndrome that we've talked about. So, all right, we've gone a little long, which we commonly do. I've currently got 2 questions in Q&A, so not a huge number, but I would encourage you guys with the 7 minutes that we have remaining to ask any questions for anyone on the panel that you have. In the meantime, I will jump into the 2 that we've got here. So from Jay Naughton, I just read these off without having read them before, so bear with me. So I find taking on new design software is okay, but once agile workflows start bleeding into UX work, I stumble. How can designers get comfortable in dev spaces like Confluence and Jira? Oh, very interesting question. So it's sort of like when you're in your comfort zone design digital space and suddenly you move over into someone else's digital design space and you're not the expert anymore all of a sudden. What do you do? I think that's kind of the gist of that. So anyone want to open season to respond to that one?
I would probably say, yeah, personally, I find a lot of this agile stuff to be just goes over my head. And that's even me being in a lead position. So you kind of got to work out where's the crossover. You need to know something about agile methodology and working with the developers and in Confluence and Jira. You need to have some idea about it. But I think it's really the place that I start with it is I have a conversation with the Scrum Master or the product owners or the BAs or whoever's mostly using those tools and that methodology. And I say to them, how do you want design to work with you? What do you need from me? Some Scrum Masters are like, oh, I expect the designers to be writing up, user stories and things like that. And then others are like, oh no, we take care of all that and we just get you involved when we need the design work. So I think it just needs to be a dialogue. And if they say something that we expect this out of you and you feel like, hey, I'm probably not up to scratch with that, that's where you sort of put your hand up and go, well, look, I'm a bit new in that area. Do you mind having a quick session with me sometime to just run me through the basics, and then I can ask any questions? My take on it is like, you can't be all things to all people. At the end of the day, if you're in the design space, that's your expertise. If you can, step and cross over into that other space a little bit and be valuable to them and useful and make their lives easier and better by your understanding of what they do, then great. But yeah, I wouldn't go too deep into that and stretch yourself too thin.
Yeah, I think it's a good one, really good one. Is sort of I've found myself sometimes, moving out of my comfort zone into someone else's expertise space, and there's this sort of I should fake it. I'm gonna start faking it and pretend I know, and that's probably the worst thing you can do. Better to be like, what's really useful for me to know, and then tell me what it is. And then they can sort of like, okay, I actually have to tell this person. So, and then that causes them to automatically prioritize what you actually really do need to know and not just sort of inundate you with unnecessary information. So really good question. We've got, we'll probably move on to the last one. Interesting. Okay, so what about age from Walter Pence? Does being younger make you less susceptible to experience the syndrome? I think we did touch on this briefly, but it is a really interesting one. So does anyone want to elaborate on it?
Look,
Taîss,
I think it's the opposite. I think being younger actually makes you more susceptible to the syndrome. And part of this is a combination of things, but I'm going to flip the question a little bit and start talking about something that no one was expecting, the Dunning-Kruger effect. So people who have heard about this before have only heard half of the message. So the Dunning-Kruger effect is a bias where people who have started out in something think that they know enough to be experts. And so, the person who is overconfident, someone who just started chess and thinks, oh yeah, I could definitely get into a chess tournament. But the other side of the Dunning-Kruger effect is that, the more you know, the more you start assessing your skills against a larger canvas. So if anything, you actually start decreasing your confidence in your skills. So we end up having these two people on both sides of the bell curve. One who is younger and doesn't have the experience and may know that they don't know everything. And then those who are experts who know they know stuff, but also now know that there's a whole bunch more that they don't know. And they both end up sitting on the same imposter syndrome seat. Look, age is going to be affected by social, we have all of this social messaging that says, you're too young, you haven't experienced life, et cetera, et cetera. I think that, the younger you are, the more likely you are to experience the syndrome, especially walking into it when you first walk into high school, when you first walk into uni, when you first walk into a new job.
Yeah, I think I can't understate like the sort of imposter syndrome that a young person will have walking into like a large corporate for the first time, for example, and people are just speaking a language, not necessarily digital, but just a business language you don't understand. And you're like, again, do I belong here? So digital imposter syndrome is just one of many. Obviously, it was our focus for today, which is a mediocre segue into closing this session out, I think. So thank you very much to our three panelists today. Thank you guys so much. Really invaluable insights. I think we barely had anyone leave the session the whole hour, and I think that speaks to how interesting the topic was, and you know, your guys' responses to it. Thank you everyone who attended the session. We do these about once a month, so keep an eye out. We also have a whole webinar library, about 20 of these that we've done in the past, ever since COVID started. We'll be sending out an email tomorrow, just sort of saying thank you with any bits of information that we didn't get to today. But yeah, hopefully this will help you to either combat digital imposter syndrome in your own lives, or to recognize it and help to combat it in your staff or colleagues. At the end of the day, it's really just about, you know, yeah, I think as Anjully said, be kind to yourself, acknowledge you're never going to know anything, own what you do know, and be excited to learn what you don't, and just take that forward into your career. So thank you guys, and have a great day.
Thank you guys.
Thank you. See ya.